Hey there. Ready to dive into the world of cybersecurity with me?
Absolutely.
Today, we're tackling the NIST SP 800-171 checklist. Think of it as the gold standard for protecting sensitive information.
And while it may sound dry, trust me, this checklist is anything but.
It's the backbone of how organizations, especially those working with the government, keep sensitive data safe.
Speaking of sensitive data, let's be clear about what we mean.
I hear controlled unclassified information, or CUI, thrown around a lot. What exactly falls under that umbrella?
Great point.
CUI is any information that needs safeguarding beyond standard security measures.
Think financial records, medical data, even proprietary research.
Basically, if it needs regulations, laws, or specific policies to protect it, it's probably CUI.
Precisely.
And the NIST SP 800-171 checklist doesn't mess around.
It's got 14 key areas covering everything from who can access data to what happens if a hurricane hits your server room.
14 areas. Wow, that's a lot to unpack.
Well, let's do it.
Where do we even begin?
Let's start with the foundation, access controls.
This is all about controlling who gets access to that sensitive information and how.
Imagine it as the front door to your data fortress.
So we're talking strong passwords, maybe even those extra security steps like they use for my bank account.
Exactly.
Think multi-factor authentication. That's where you need your password and a code from your phone, for example.
We also have password policies that make password 123 a thing of the past. And a biggie is the principle of least privilege.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that last one. Break that down for me.
Essentially, it's about giving people the bare minimum access they need to do their jobs and no more.
Like, an intern wouldn't need access to the same files as the CEO, right?
Makes sense.
But even with a super secure front door, people need to know how to handle the valuables inside, right?
You're spot on.
That's where awareness and training come in.
This is about ensuring everyone in the organization understands these security risks.
They need to know the procedures, the policies, and even how to spot those sneaky social engineering tactics hackers use.
Social engineering.
That sounds intense.
It can be.
Think of it as the art of manipulating people into giving up confidential information.
Like that email that looks like it's from your bank, asking you to verify your details. That's a classic social engineering tactic.
Yikes. It's scary how convincing those can be. So it sounds like training is essential.
But how do we keep track of everything that's happening?
You can't tell me there's someone watching every single login attempt 24/7.
Well, not a person, exactly.
That's where the watchdog of the system comes in: audit and accountability.
This is all about logging activities and keeping an eye out for any fishy behavior.
So we're talking digital paper trails.
Keeping a record of who accessed what, when, and making sure they were supposed to be there.
That's a lot of logs to go through.
That's where technology comes in handy.
Think of it as having a sophisticated security system that not only records every event, but also analyzes it for anything out of the ordinary.
And if anything suspicious does pop up, it triggers an alert.
That makes me feel a little better.
But even with all these precautions, I imagine things can still slip through the cracks, right?
Software updates, new devices, human error.
Absolutely.
And that's why the next area, configuration management, is crucial.
We're talking about ensuring every device, every piece of software, and even the tiniest firmware updates are properly configured and up to date.
So it's like making sure every single lock on our data fortress is secure and working properly.
Precisely.
You wouldn't want a single weak link to compromise the entire chain, right?
Now, speaking of chains, let's talk about who holds the keys to those locks.
I'm guessing this is about making sure we know who's who in the digital world.
You got it.
Identification and authentication is all about verifying that the person or device accessing the system is who they say they are. So username and password isn't enough anymore.
Exactly.
You're saying we need to confirm it's really the right person trying to get in.
Think of it like a double check.
Okay.
We're not just relying on a simple password. We might ask for a one-time code from a phone.
Right.
Use some advanced authentication methods that only work on specific devices.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these areas are intertwined.
Right.
But let's be honest, no system is foolproof. What happens if someone tries to break in or a virus gets through?
That's where incident response comes in.
Okay.
And this one is crucial. You need a plan, a playbook for handling those situations.
Okay.
Think of it as your emergency plan for your data fortress.
So you're not just hoping for the best. You're actively planning for the worst. That's smart. But what about keeping the fortress itself in good working order?
Right.
We've covered the locks and the guards, but what about the actual walls and the infrastructure?
You're right. It's all about ongoing maintenance.
Okay.
That's where the next area of maintenance comes in.
Okay.
Think of it as the regular upkeep of your system, making sure everything is up to date and secure.
So we're talking about software updates, security patches, and even those little firmware updates for your devices. It's a bit like giving your computer a checkup and making sure it's healthy around.
You wouldn't want a vulnerable device to open up a backdoor for attackers.
Right.
Now, let's talk about how we protect the valuables themselves, those sensitive files, the data that we're trying to protect.
This is about secure storage.
Mm-hmm.
How we physically protect hard drives and stuff.
You're getting it. Media protection covers both the physical and digital side of the coin.
Right.
Think about how we store those sensitive files, how we manage hard drives, flash drives, and even those paper records.
It's easy to forget about those physical documents sometimes, especially in our digital age. It's important to remember that cybersecurity is about protecting data wherever it exists, even in the physical world.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about the people who are responsible for securing all of this.
So we're talking about the human element, right?
Mm-hmm.
The people who are on the front lines of defending our data fortress.
Exactly. And that's where personnel security comes in.
Okay.
This area is about ensuring that the people who have access to sensitive information are trustworthy, properly trained, and that their access is managed carefully.
So we're talking background checks, security training, and making sure they only have access to the information they need to do their job. Right?
Exactly. It's all about ensuring that people understand their responsibilities and that they're equipped to handle sensitive information responsibly.
I can see how that's crucial, especially considering how often human error can be a factor in security breaches.
You're right. It's a common saying in the cybersecurity world, people are the weakest link.
Right.
And you know what?
What's that?
It's important to remember that this doesn't just apply to malicious intent.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes it's simply a matter of someone making a mistake.
That's a good point. We all make mistakes. So comprehensive training is definitely key. But we've talked about the people inside the fortress. What about the actual physical security of the building itself?
Right.
We're not just talking about data centers here, right?
Right. You are absolutely right. Physical protection is about safeguarding the physical environment where sensitive information is stored and processed.
So we're talking about locks, alarms, security cameras, and making sure that the physical environment is secure, right?
Precisely. You wouldn't want someone to just walk in and walk out with sensitive information on a hard drive, would you?
Definitely not. So it sounds like this checklist is really comprehensive, covering everything from the software and the people to the physical security of the building itself.
Absolutely. And to tie it all together, we have to talk about one of the most important aspects of cybersecurity risk assessment.
Oh, here comes the big one. So we're talking about identifying all the things that could go wrong, right?
Exactly. Risk assessment is all about identifying those potential threats, evaluating how likely they are to happen, and then determining the potential impact if they do happen.
So we're not just talking about someone hacking into the system.
We're exactly right.
We're also talking about things like natural disasters, fires, power outages, all of that.
Risk assessment looks at the big picture.
Right.
It could be a disgruntled employee, a sophisticated cyber attack, or even something as simple as a spilled cup of coffee on a server.
Oh, wow.
We identify those risks and figure out how to either prevent them or minimize the damage if they do happen.
So it's about being proactive rather than reactive.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
And once you've identified those risks, you need to see how well your defenses hold up, right? That's where security assessment comes in.
So we're testing the system, looking for vulnerabilities before someone else does.
Think of it like a stress test for your cybersecurity.
Okay.
We might use automated tools, penetration testing, ethical hacking, basically, or even manual checks to see where the weaknesses are and how we can improve them.
So we're finding those cracks in the fortress walls and patching them up before someone else can exploit them.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, this isn't a one-time thing. The threat landscape is constantly changing, so we need to regularly assess and update our security posture.
It sounds like a never-ending battle. But we're not just trying to protect the fortress itself, right?
Yeah.
We also need to make sure the information stays secure when it's being transported.
You're thinking about system and communications protection.
Okay.
This is all about safeguarding information while it's on the move.
So when we're sending emails, sharing files, or even just browsing the internet.
Exactly. We're talking encryption, scrambling the data so it's unreadable without the key secure communication protocols, and anything else that ensures sensitive information stays confidential during transmission.
It's like putting those valuable files in a locked briefcase before they leave the fortress.
Perfect
All
analogy.
right.
Now, let's say those files have reached their destination safely. How do we know they haven't been tampered with in transit?
That's a good question. We've talked about securing access, training people, even physically protecting the data. But how do we ensure the information itself is accurate?
That's a whole other level.
Yep.
You've hit on the final, an incredibly important area, system and information integrity.
Oh, okay.
This is about ensuring the data itself is accurate, reliable, and hasn't been tampered with.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it as quality control for your information.
So we're talking about things like backups, data recovery plans, and systems that can detect if someone's messed with the information.
You got it.
Right.
It's about making sure that the information you're relying on is trustworthy and hasn't been compromised in any way.
Wow, this checklist is incredibly thorough. It's amazing how much goes into protecting sensitive information.
It's a complex world,
Yeah.
and it's only getting more complex.
Right.
But having a framework like this, the NIST SP 800-171, gives organizations a roadmap, a way to navigate those complexities and keep their data safe.
This has been a fascinating deep dive. It's
Mhm.
definitely given me a whole new appreciation for the work that goes into cybersecurity.
It's not just about firewalls and passwords anymore.
It never really was.
It's about understanding the value of the information, the threats, the vulnerabilities, and having a multi-layered approach to address them all.
Well said.
Mm-hmm.
And a huge thank you for guiding us through this. I feel like I've learned a ton, and I'm sure our listeners have too.
My pleasure.
It's been a great conversation.
Always happy to talk about cybersecurity.
And for our listeners, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time, stay curious.